Hi guys, this is Nadia from Imbali Crafts, and today I want to show you how to create this asymmetrical pendant with stone setting. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button because I upload new stuff on a regular basis. I quite often make PDF tutorials for the videos I put up on here. They also come with kits. I have all sorts of gemstones, square half round wire and beads, and all sorts of nice goodies on my website, so I will pop a link below and you can take a gander over and see if there's anything you fancy. Last but not least, we have an awesome wire wrap group, which I will also pop a link below, so take a look and come and join us. Right, let's get started. Right, to begin with, we're going to wrap our base wires. So in this case, I've used 4 base wires, so obviously depending on the width of your cabochon, you want to maybe use an extra strand or maybe less, depending what the size of your stone is. Obviously, as long as it sort of covers the thickness of the stone, you should be all right. So to bind the wires together, I'm using 0.6 22 gauge half round wire for this, and I just do a couple of reps, about 6 or 7 or so in the middle. I always do an odd number, so that there is one in the middle when you put the bend in it, but that's just personal preference. Obviously you can do this whichever way you want. Now what I tend to do is obviously cut the wires off in the middle and the underside that is facing the stone, so that it prevents the wire from snagging. So that's what it looks like, and I just give it a bit of a squeeze so that it flattens down, and then I put a bend in it, kind of like a V shape. Alright, so then I get my stone and I'm going to leave a gap just big enough for the stone that we're going to be fitting in as the accent below. So in this case, this is a 5mm. So I make sure that I have enough space for the stone as well as the wire we're going to use to set the stone. So just take that into consideration when setting the stone. So I'm just kind of shaping the square wires around the stone itself so that it kind of sits in the middle, and we're going to put a bend into the wire near the tip of the stone so that the wires coming out the top run parallel. You can keep adjusting this. The wire is generally quite forgiving at this stage, as long as you obviously don't work it too much. Then I test the fit, and always make sure you've got enough space left for the stone, the accent stone, to fit in. Right, so next we're going to bind the sides. I should have done this before, so this is just to keep the wires in line. It would have actually been easier if you had done this before shaping it around the stone, so I don't know why I did it afterwards. Should have happened before. So I'm just going to do 5 reps or so on each side, and once again I trim the wires off on the inside to prevent any snagging, and then I just press the wires down as well with my pliers just to flatten it out a bit and work harden the wire. Let's see, I use some fine tip flash cutters, and then I squeeze the wire and just make sure that they are sitting on the same side, or the same height on each side, and then you can take your stone and do a fit check again. Just make sure I've got enough space for the stone at the bottom, and that looks fine so far. And the next step is to bind the top. Alright, so I'm taking another piece of half round wire. I use 0.6, which is 22 gauge. You can also use 0.8 if you want. And if you don't have half round, you can also use round if you want to. The reason I like half round is because you get more width, but half the depth, if that makes sense. So it looks nice, and it doesn't look so bulky when you use half round. So what I'm doing here is I'm just wrapping very gently, do about 4 or 5 wraps around all of the wires. You want to make sure that they are lined up and squared up, so that they create like a block before you wind the wire around. So I have attached the wire at the bottom, and I'm going to bend the 2 upmost wires outwards, and then I've got 3 wires on each side which I want to separate out, and what we're going to do is just take the half round wire, and we're just going to go around the 2 wires at the top, and this is going to be our bell. So keep fighting the wire here a little bit, because half round wire as well as square has a tendency to want to twist and bend out of shape. So you just have to be really careful when you're doing this wrap and keep flattening out the half round wire. All right, so I've gone all the way to the top, and I'm just going to fit my stone in again, just to make sure that everything is still all right, if it lets me, if it wants to sit in there. So here it is, and it seems to be okay so far, kind of like the fit. And next we're going to be shaping the bell. Just make sure obviously that each side is parallel. So before we're going to do the bell, I'm going to create the seat for the stone. So here I'm using some very fine tipped pliers. I really like these. I said this many times before. I got these off eBay somewhere. They're quite cheap. They're only like £5 or so, and they're my favorite pair of pliers because they've got a really fine tip. So what I'm doing here is I'm going very close to the binding wires on each side, and I'm kind of twisting it in a clockwise motion on the left and in anti-clockwise motion on the right, just so that I bend the wires inwards, which then kind of creates like a seat for the stone to sit in. And at the bottom here near the base, I'm just going in a little bit further to give it more of a ledge and also a bit more support for the accent stone that we're going to be adding later. So that's what it looks like, and then you can seat your stone and test the fit. Seems to be all good so far, so quite happy with that. And sometimes the wires are pressed together, so I have an extra fine pair of pliers. So this is a watchmaker's pair of pliers, also from eBay. If you search watchmaker pliers, you'll get this, an extremely fine tip. I'm using this to separate the wires. I quite like it for fine work when you need to pull wires through a gap you can't reach normal pliers or so. And these are quite handy. Obviously they're very delicate, so you cannot use them for any heavier gauges, so they bend out of shape really quickly. So, but I find them quite handy. So I'm just using these to create a little bit of a gap between the wires so that it enables me to bring in my bigger pliers. There you go. I think I'm actually using these to pull these to sort of 0.8, which we've used at a 20 gauge. Is quite soft, so we can use these to pull the wires over the top. I'm going to do the same at the bottom. So what I'm doing here is I'm folding the uppermost wire ever so slightly over the stone, just enough to hold it in place. So that's that, and the next step is to shape the bell. So I wanted a fairly long bell, so I've used 45 centimeters. I'm not sure what that is in inches, but I will usually put the conversion in there for you, and create a fairly long bell. And I'm very gently bending those 2 wires over the top, and then I'm going to separate out the square wires at the base, and I'm just going to wrap each wire around the respective wires, 3 wires on each side, to bind the bell and set it in place. There you go. Right, so next step is to take these square wires, and I try not to twist them sideways so that they stay nice and flat. I hope that makes sense. Just you want to make sure that there's a flat surface touching the 3 wires at all times, because if you twist a square wire, it tends to increase in size somehow and become a lot more bulky when you twist it around other objects. So try and keep it nice and flat. Obviously squeeze and just make sure that it holds on tight. There we go, and that is the bell set. And just make sure that the bell is the sort of round section of the bell is right over the stone, so that there's nice balance in the design. All right, so now I'm satisfied with that, and we're going to start with our first detail section. So what I'm doing here is all these wires on the right hand side need to come upwards and through the bale itself. So I'm just taking each one at a time, and again, try not to twist it if possible. You want to make sure that it stays the same flat side up. I hope that makes sense. And we're going to bring these through the belt and position them in readiness to create our first sort of detail. So I'm going to bring the last one up, and they will always bend out of shape and look like a dog's breakfast at this stage. So don't worry, you can always straighten them out later. We're just going to position them, and that's what it should look like so far. Okay, so straighten them out a bit, and now from now on this is all organic design, so nothing that I make will look exactly like what you make. It's just a sort of general direction that I have shaped the wires in. So what I'm doing here is I'm going in an anti-clockwise direction, and I am shaping them over and then down towards the right hand side of the pendant, so over the bale and then out towards the right. And this is just sort of the start of the design itself. And now make sure that the wires all sit nice and parallel to each other. And then I'm taking the utmost wires and create a swirl with two of them. And the third one kind of stays put on the inside. This is just so to give it a little bit of a different interest. So that's what it looks like. So far so good, and obviously adjust them to your liking. Take your time with it, and only continue once you're satisfied with the look. So I'm taking one of the wires and I'm wrapping it around the bale just to give it a little bit of strength and make sure that nothing is loose. If you have too long a length of swirls, it's not very secure, so I tend to attach the swirls whenever I go and to make sure that they are, you know, tightly attached to the frame. So on the right hand side, I am bringing the 3 right hand wires, and I'm shaping these in a clockwise motion towards the stone and then back out towards the left. And then the innermost wire, the outermost, is shaped into a swirl. Now just make sure this is for a 4mm stone setting. So just make sure that the stone setting, the loop, is big enough to hold the stone, but not too small to let the stone fall through. Obviously, it's not too small to let the stone sit too high up. You need to make sure that when you twist the remaining wire over the stone, and there isn't too much bulk there to make it stand out too much. You can see there I have a bit of a problem to keep the stone seated, which will happen. You get better with that as practice comes along. And then all I'm doing here is I'm very slowly shaping the wire over stone, and really just take your time with that. It gets much better with practice as well, and kind of let the wire do what the wire wants to do. So don't try and force it, and just kind of follow it, and it will kind of lay itself over the stone. If you're not 100% satisfied with the way the setting sits, you can always tweak it with a pair of pliers, obviously very, very gently adjusting the wire as you go. And that way you can tweak it until you're completely satisfied. Always take care to try not to mark the wire too much. Okay, so quite happy with that. And next we're going to take some of the half round that's left over from the bale. If you've cut it off, just take another piece. As I said many times before, my work always looks like an octopus because I never cut any wires off, just in case I'm going to use them at some point later. So it always looks like spaghetti junction when I do something. So this is why. So I'm just reusing what I had left over from the bale, and I'm attaching the 3 wires that we've taken from the left to the frame and bind them together. So once that's done, I'm just going to make sure I'm also going through the frame, just so that there's extra strength added to it. So I'm going to feed it through the top and the frame, and very gently pull it through and make sure it's tightly attached to the frame itself. Okay, so we're going to carry on with the actual design. So the innermost wire, I actually need to put my glasses on because I can't see. The innermost wire is going to be shaped into an anti-clockwise swirl, and I'm often using my pair of pliers to adjust them as I go. So feed them along and just shape it to your liking. And I always try and make sure that my swirls are nice and round. Not everybody likes them round, so you can keep them a little bit oblong if you prefer that. And we're going to shape the remaining wires on the outside, so follow the same curve. And we're going to take the innermost wire and create a clockwise swirl. So feed it through and take your time with it. And I'm going to place it sort of in the middle of the pendant. And as I said earlier, you know, this is going to be a very organic design. So you can follow the path that I've taken, but obviously it's going to be the way you want it to look. All right, so then we've got the remaining bit from the inside, and we need to attach it to the frame at some point. So I'm going to bend it inwards. Before I'm going to do that, I'm just going to create another swirl. And the swirls I create on each side are going to be smaller in size the further down I go. So they're quite big at the top and sort of medium size in the middle, and then a bit smaller at the bottom, just to create a little bit of detail and some interesting sort of pattern. And I adjust it until I'm happy with the shape, like so. And then, as I said earlier, I like to attach these loose tendrils, let's call them, to my frame. So I'm going to go through the base here where the accent stone is going to sit. Just very gently feed it through, and then all I'm going to do is do one wrap around these base wires. This tends to fight me on occasion, so just use your pliers to very gently adjust. I never force anything too much. I always tend to wiggle and push and pull gently, and that way you have a lot more control over the wires. So I'm shaping the outermost wire, and I'm going to create a little swirl at the base. It's a little tendril towards the outside. And that's what it looks like so far. Right, so happy with that. And now I'm going to fully attach the wire at the base here, so bending out the one that I've placed, sorry, out of shot here a little bit. Sometimes I can't see properly with the camera overhead. So I'm kind of rolling the square wire around the frame to get the shape right, and then I use my pliers a lot to position the wire and squeeze it. And as always, try and keep the flat side of the square wire in contact with the frame. And that's what it looks like so far. And I'm just going to trim off the wire, and always try and trim it off towards the inside so that there's no snagging. All right, so happy with that. So next, again, bring the half round if you've got any left over, and we're going to be attaching the swirls to the frame, just 2 or 3 wraps, and always try and place them in an inconspicuous area so that they don't stand out too much, but I like to tie them down because otherwise they just get bent out of shape if they get hooked. All right, so happy with that. So now I'm trimming off the half round wire, and as always, try and make sure they are trimmed off where they can't snag. There you go. And we're going to do the same at the bottom here. Bring these in, and pliers in, and then trim them off. And that's what the left side looks so far. So that's all done. We're going to move on to the right hand side now. Right, so I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side. So I'm taking here the innermost square wire, and I'm creating a clockwise swirl. So that's what it looks like so far. And again, I'm going to use my pair of pliers to adjust the shape and the size and the general look of the swirl. And I take the middle wire and I kind of position it towards the outside, and I'm going to go a little bit further down towards the middle of the pendant and then create an anti-clockwise swirl in the middle of the pendant. Use pliers to shape. And if you have round nose pliers, you can use those as well if you prefer. So no technique is ever set in stone. You can only ever learn how to create something from somebody else and then apply your own sort of spin to things, and whatever works for me doesn't work for you and vice versa. So it just depends how you like to do things. I'll just show you how I do my techniques and then you make them work for you. All right, so again, bring a piece of half round wire, and all we're going to do is do a couple of wraps around two of the wires and the two wires, and then we're going to attach those two wires to the frame. So 2 is enough. And again, this is just to make sure that, you know, if any part of the pendant gets hooked on something, it doesn't get damaged. All right, so I've attached it. And I'm going to trim off the square wires, and I'm going to continue shaping the square towards the bottom. So I've only got a small piece left. I've used a little bit less wire than I have put in the description for you. So you will have a little bit more length left, because I thought it would have been nicer to have a bit more wire to play with. So you have a little bit more to work with. So I'm going to shape the last wire at the bottom, and I always kind of go the opposite direction of the previous swirl. That just creates a little bit more detail and an accent really. I always squeeze the end when I create swirls with my pliers so that they kind of taper out. You'll see that in many of my videos, like so. And then once again, obviously, we're going to tie this down, and you could still do something with the remaining wires. I'm always loath to trim off any wires because I think it's a sin to, you know, get rid of perfectly good weaving wire or detail wire. But in this case, I think there's enough detail there. So we're just going to trim them off. Also, the video would be too long if I started doing more with it. So if you still have these left over, you can do whatever you want with them, create more swirls, do more stone settings, or put a weave in, whatever you like to do with them. So I just trimmed them off, and that's what it looks like so far. All right, so this is a stone setting. There's a link to the stone setting below in the description. I've put a video up for that, so I won't put it in this video, otherwise we would be here for a while. So once we have done the setting, I just slide it through the pendant and slot it in place below the stone. That's the gap we left previously. And then I just kind of open up the outsides, the wires there, and I find a space on the pendant, on the frame, to very securely attach these in place. Now, if you don't really know how to do the setting and it's too complex, you can use a drill bead instead. All right, and the last but not least, it's my favorite part. It's the accent beads. I really like using them, whether it's silver or copper or any other material. I think they look great. So I always have a sort of stash of my beads. I've got them on my website as well if you want to have a look. And that's the whole pendant done. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this, and obviously don't forget to hit the subscribe button, as I said, because I upload new stuff on a regular basis. You can come and visit me on any of my social media. I've got Instagram, TikTok, obviously the YouTube channel, Facebook, and obviously don't forget to visit my wire wrap group, which is called Wire Wrappers and Metalsmith Artists Worldwide, we're a fun bunch. We always do some great challenges, and we always have some fun banter going. And last not but least, I have got kits, PDF tutorials, gemstones, beads, you name it, everything that you would need for wire wrapping on my website. So I'll pop a link below and you can pop in and see if there's anything you fancy. And that's it for me. Thanks for watching.